This is the High-Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. I'm Eric Balkman from the High-Stakes Fantasy Football Hour and the FFPC. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Balkman and the FFPC on Twitter at FFPC. Before we get into the show, I want to remind everyone that you can get a listeners-only 10% discount to RotoViz by using the code RVRadio2022. That's RVRADIO2022. Your subscription gives you unlimited access to all of the RotoViz content and tools, and it supports the podcast channel. Now, without further ado, here's the latest edition of the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown. Happy championship week, everybody. Welcome into the latest edition of the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown. I am Eric Balkman from the FFPC, the High-Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, and the Better Sports Network's High-Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Want to remind everybody to play the FFPC Weekly Challenge this week for Week 16. There's no Week 17, beg your pardon. There's no draft, no salary cap. You just pick the 10 or 12 players that you want to. If you want to play in the 10-player format, that does not include kickers and defenses, you can do that. Play in the 12-team format with kickers and defenses, you can do that as well. You can play in a 100-team league, a 30-team league, or you can play in a 10-team league where if you beat the other 9 players in there, you will win a free entry to the 2023 FFPC Main Event to play for a $1 million grand prize. You can also play for a $35 entry as well. That's all at myffpc.com. Don't forget that the playoff challenges registration are live. MyFFPC.com is where to go to register for the world-famous FFPC Playoff Challenge, a $500,000 grand prize, $200 entry, and Footballguys Playoff Challenge, a $100,000 grand prize, just a $35 entry in that as well. Real simple, set it and forget it. You don't mess around with your lineups throughout the duration of the playoffs. There's no draft, there's no salary cap. Just pick one player per NFL team, fade 2 teams that are in the playoffs, and there's your lineup. And hopefully you can win a $500,000 or a $100,000 grand prize. Without further ado, let's get into the show tonight. I want to welcome in the Week 16 second-place team owner in the FFPC Main Event, as he is just one spot away from a $1 million grand prize. One spot away and 1 week away from a $1 million grand prize. You follow him on Twitter at Amity Hooks. Please welcome in Norm Behrens. Norm, happy championship week to you, man.
Happy championship week to you too, Bulk.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'm going for a few titles, but nowhere near what you're going for here in the main event. And it's wild because I looked at, I don't want to say you limped into the championship round, but you were further down on the draft board. And then I want to say you put up a 223, right, in Week 15. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that was pretty impressive, and that was not expected.
What was that like watching that, seeing yourself rise up the leaderboard?
I got to be honest, I'm a superstitious person, so I don't usually watch a lot of the games when I get to this level of play at the championship round. And all the years that we've done the championship round, we don't usually have, we're more middling, especially when you look at an 823 team smorgasbord of players here, that we don't usually get into this rarefied air. So we weren't even expecting that. And to have it hit was fantastic.
Yeah, and now you're just one spot away, 1 week away, as I just alluded to. It could be a huge payday, and even if you finish in second, that's a huge payday as well. In the episode that you're about to watch tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we'll break down the difficult start-sit decisions that Norm's facing this week, who he got right in his player evaluations this season, and why he got them right, and so much more. So to kick things off tonight, Norm, I think the best thing to do it is talk about the quarterback situation and how you've been handling this position in the championship round thus far. Trevor Lawrence against Dallas in Week 15 is who you went with. Last week, you chose Brock Purdy against Washington. Now you have a situation that everything's on the line. You really got to get this position right. Trevor Lawrence is playing the Texans. Brock Purdy is playing the Raiders. And you also have Tyler Huntley on this roster, the freshly named Pro Bowl 4th alternate in the AFC, which I still can't believe. Tyler Huntley against the Steelers. What's the conversation been like? And I assume you have co-owners with this, right?
Yeah, Jason Durr is my co-owner, and we've obviously gone round and round on this. And for anyone listening to listen to those starting quarterbacks, they're all probably asking how are you even here? We started with Russ Wilson. We had a lot of confidence in that. It's been a long road. We drafted him way late. We expected to be able to sleep on and push out the QB position and get those other positions filled. And obviously Russ is a dumpster fire in Denver, and we had Jimmy G at midseason, and we were also lucky enough to be able to get Trevor Lawrence, who we've kind of relied on as our QB1, which I'm not at all embarrassed about because he's produced. Last week was a unique situation with the weather that was going to be in Jersey on a Thursday play, which nobody likes. I don't like Thursday plays because it always seems to be a stinker for those who are into it. But the weather, and then just the fact that they're up against the Jets, who are trying really hard to make it a show, and Sauce Gardner is obviously one of the best. So we benched Trevor, and it was we still ended up being in the same ballpark with Purdy as far as total points, but Trevor still would have been the better play. Tyler Huntley's not in the mix for us. I don't think there's no chance that he's going to be the play there, but we're still looking at the options here because obviously we have matchups. We have Trevor Lawrence and we have Jacksonville wide receiver. We have Purdy. We have Kittle. So there's benefits to both of them, and we're just going to have to try and pick the right one.
The Jaguars and Texans kick off on Sunday at 1 p.m. The 49ers and Raiders are kicking off at 4:05 on Sunday afternoon. I assume, Norman, I don't want to, be presumptuous here. I assume this decision is probably going to be made right around noon or 12:30 Eastern time on Sunday.
Yeah, we both try and make sure that we have our at least our basic understanding of what we want for rosters set before the 1:00 game time. But we're always leaving the option for what else might happen in case news breaks or the weather or what have you, especially at this part of the season. We're still trying to enjoy the fact that we're at the second seat of the overall championship competition right now. So I'm trying really hard not to overthink things right now because there's still a lot of information to be gathered. And that 4:00 play is actually preferred for me because we don't have any Monday night plays, and nothing's worse than being in a competition like this and having your lead or your lack of lead be enhanced and or melting away because other teams that you're competing against have players in those matchups. And if you look at the board for who's around us in seeding, there's a lot of Josh Allen's there. There's a lot of T. Higginses. There's a lot of that, and I'm not excited about that at all. So I'm leaning towards the later plays. It's not going to make much of a difference though. So it's just a matter of which QB is going to be the better play for us.
And I will look forward to seeing what you guys decide when I look at that on Sunday. You're trailing the Go Bills franchise, obviously. Dom Baranye, Sean Stutzman, and Nick Costantino, the guys who won the main event last year, are up on you by a little bit less than 20 points for first place this year. Do you think you and Jason, are you going to make any adjustments to your lineup that you maybe wouldn't normally do to try to secure that million? Because even if you don't get the million, I mean, you stay in second place. That's still a six-figure grand prize or a six-figure runner-up prize.
Yeah, I don't know that we're going to make any adjustments based on what they submit. It's always about submitting the best roster, period. I have to say out front, I think they're going to walk away with it again. I think that they went forward into the future and came back with Biff Tannen Sports Almanac because they're playing everything right every week, both years, and there's no way this isn't. I'm just kidding. I don't want to think that they think that they're cheating, but they're killing it.
But yeah, I mean, think about that though. Like, so even if you're saying they're cheating, it's like how are they? Because they're making these unbelievable.
Right.
We talked about this. I can't remember what. Mike Shope was on with me on the Better Sports Network's High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Not this past Wednesday, but the Wednesday before. And that was the week that the Go Bills guys had to decide between. They had to pick two of these three guys, and it was Bam Knight, Zay Jones, and Jerick McKinnon. And they had Bam Knight in there, but then they decided not. They decided Costantino told Mike, yeah, we took him out because we thought everybody would have him. And they went from 48th place to first because they played Zay Jones in his 3 touchdown game. and then Jerick McKinnon, who obviously blew up that week as well. So it's like for whatever reason, they have, I made a deal with Christopher Lloyd and Michael J. Fox, and perhaps they have access to this stuff that we just don't. I'm not sure. But you raise a good point, for sure, Norm. This is wild. AJ Dillon, I'm specifically talking about your lineup. AJ Dillon is in at flex at last check for me. How much have you considered, and I think you kind of alluded to this when I was asking you that quarterback question, how much have you considered stacking Zay Jones at flex, benching AJ Dillon, and then putting Trevor Lawrence in there and hoping they hook up on, a big, massive, 3 touchdown game like they did in week 15?
That's a lot of our conversation is going to hinge upon that stack. If we go with Trevor Lawrence, we're probably going to have Zay in there, and we also benefited from having Zay in that first week of the playoff with his 3 touchdowns. So depending on the stack, that's probably where we'll go with whatever QB we start. AJ Dillon, though, is a good option too. We're living and dying by the flexes, not dying, but we're living at the point where RB1, RB2, wide 1, wide 2 are kind of static. We're not going to move away from them because they're the go-tos that we've drafted and lived in and died with all season long. So it's a matter of looking at the flexes and what are our best options. We've got Pollard, we've got Dillon, we've got Zay, we've got the possibility of a Dulcich or a Komet, probably to a lesser degree with their 1.5 premium. Yeah, it is something to consider, but again, it's going to depend on some of who we play at quarterback, and then better part will be what about the matchups.
So if you play Lawrence, you're probably going to play Zay Jones, right?
Probably. I mean, that would be logical, but again, there's stranger things have happened. We would have been better off last week if we had played Trevor and not played Zay, and we didn't play Zay. But it's hard to break that stack when you're at this point. I mean, you've kind of had them in there all along, but this is where, again, the flex position has always been the albatross for everybody, where you really want to make the right call and you have so many options available to you if you're able to have a roster that has that. I still stress over the fact on Wednesday nights, I'm like, we got to do fab, and there's no fab to be had, and there hasn't been for a couple of weeks now. So having the last gasp of whatever players you have on your roster available and alive. And now we're faced with more of the decision of what teams are going to start sitting people, what teams are going to start resting people to consider. And last week we had weather to consider. So I'm hoping that this, knock on wood, this weekend isn't as bad for weather, but the resting and the sitting stuff is going to be also weighed in with this. And we are, again, having to always monitor injuries and what effect that has on our roster, because there's no saving grace of a fab on Sunday. Right,
exactly. And you alluded to this too with the other tight ends you have on your roster besides George Kittle. But Cole Kmet has a pretty good matchup against a less than stellar Detroit defense. Greg Dulcich is probably going to have a positive game script, you would think, with the Chiefs being, 2 touchdown favorites against the Broncos. Given that this is, again, tight end premium scoring, is it likely that either of these guys find your way into your lineup? I know you're considering it, but how serious is that consideration?
It's funny because Jason and I had talked about this. If we were like we normally are when we were into this dance, I mean, we've been doing this for a number of years. If we were in the 500s and 600s and we wanted to do something that was a risk because there's nothing to lose, I'd be more open to the thought. But at this point, and not that we're trying to be not aggressive or too careful, but we definitely are going to weigh more of the options of, okay, who's actually going to give us the better safety of production. And agreeably, Dulcich has been coming on, but now he's got a hammy issue, and that whole front office is on fire. And I just don't have a comfort with sitting on Dulcich in a flex when we could have Zay or AJ Dillon, who both are going to want to play at the top of their game.
And again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but even though you're trailing first place by about 18 points, it almost seems like you guys are looking at this, the standpoint of like, okay, well, even if we don't win the $1 million grand prize this week, there's still a lot of money to be had. We'll settle for $200,000 for second. We'll settle for $100,000 for third. And that's how you're framing this, where you're almost setting your lineup based on high floor rather than high ceiling.
Yeah, you and I talked about this when we did the podcast back in 2021, where we as players, we don't really gear for this time of year as the coup de grace, if you will. We look at the first 14 weeks and say that's how you make your profitability and your buy-in for the next year, and that's what we really focus on. This is all icing. So the fact that we're even here is just exciting and entertaining. I don't want to lose. I don't want to fall down. I don't want to lose out to the Buffalo guys again and their almanac from the year from Biff Tannen. But I don't. I'm struggling to not be overconfident, and also struggling to not be like, well, we're just not even going to get anything. So even though we're in second, because I've seen, what was it last year? 20 teams in the top, 11 teams in the top 20 fell out of the top 20. 5 of them were in the top 10. So that's a pretty big push from the top down when you go from the second to last week to the finals. And I don't want to be a part of that. So again, this is where the stress is on, the excitement is on, but it's also, this is where you make or break your team in this stage of this championship.
In looking at this team that you have in second place, I always, anytime a guest comes on, I always like to look at the draft, look at their lineup decisions, look at their fab. And I looked at your transactions this year, and I feel like compared to a lot of the other players that we've had on shows this year, I feel like you guys were more active on the waiver wire for this team. And you already talked about it, the quarterback thing, where you start out with Russell Wilson and then you bounce around with Jimmy Garoppolo, now Trevor Lawrence, Tyler Huntley, and Brock Purdy. Do you feel like this team, for whatever reason, you were more active on the waiver wire in trying to make this team not only a good team, but a great team?
Yeah, we were. We're always active on Fab. I mean, that's where Jason's a big anchor for me, because I have a tendency to get frustrated with players, especially some of the younger players, and just say, cut it, cut bait, get someone who's going to be productive this past week. Not that I go chasing, and I certainly don't try and break the bank on these things, but we are active on Fab. If you really looked at our deep dive into our Fab, you'd probably see a lot of waffling where we cut someone and then we sign them back and then cut them again. And that's not indecision. Some of that is purposeful, especially towards the end of the season, where we're cycling through defenses to try and protect anything that we might have. It's kind of a jerk move, if you will, but sometimes we look at our opponents and say, okay, we want to make sure that they don't have this player or that player available to them. So we do try and play defensive as much as we can within the confines of knowing that our quarterback room was a shit show. Sorry. So we were more active, and this year was even stranger for us, because I think everyone can acknowledge it. I've seen some people talking about it on Twitter, where there really wasn't a make or break Fab signing in the first couple of weeks for anybody.
Right.
There was last year. We benefited from one of our teams that did well. That was Elijah Mitchell. We got him in the first week, and we broke bank to get him, but he made our championship. And there really, I don't feel like there was that this year. There wasn't anything that was like, holy cow, this guy was not drafted by anyone and somebody signed him. Maybe some Dameon Pierce's late by early drafters that didn't have him off the board when he was at the start of the season for most of the drafts. But and even then, because of the injury, he wasn't as productive these last couple weeks, obviously. So there's no benefit to that. I don't feel like there was any real Fab barn busters of what people can walk away with and say, I stuck the pin on that and it saved my team. We were in constant reaction mode for what is it this week that we can possibly sign and not break the bank on it, because we know we're going to have to keep doing this.
Yeah, it was almost like a methodical thing where it's just like, okay, we didn't have to blow $300, $400, $500 in the first couple of weeks. So now you can kind of like, bites at the apple, chip away at your Fab and just make these strategic moves, whether it's keeping players off other people's rosters or whether you're playing the matchups with not kickers, but defenses or tight ends or what have you. Then you had that luxury to do that this year, because there wasn't that big must-have guy, gotta-have guy where everybody's blowing all their Fab.
I think if you look at a lot of other teams' Fabs too, I think a lot of people are formally adopting the streaming effect of the intangibles, the kickers and the defenses at low dollar values. I really, for all the leagues we've been in, I didn't see many transactions where kickers and defenses were going for much more than 20 to 30. Right. There was an occasional, wow, I got to get him for this reason, or I'm a homer and I want that defense. But I didn't see in all the leagues we're in there's a lot of chasing of kickers and defenses. So if you take that chip away mentality, it doesn't hurt. I mean, we didn't feel pressured at the end. I mean, hell, we still got Tyler Huntley for $1 on a dream, because we felt like our quarterbacks were so bad that we needed the 3 to go into this stage of the playoffs and stage of the competition. We needed those 3 quarterbacks to have comfort.
I feel like you're not going to get the kickers, because I played the matchups on defenses and not so much kickers. I always try to make sure I have a kicker that week who is playing in a game that has a decent or a high total. And I don't really get into the kicker minutia too much after that. And for defenses, and when I play in Kentucky in the KFFSC, that it really rewards defenses. So a lot of times you'll see, more than half the league drafting 2 defenses, which makes it more difficult to play streaming defenses with that. But I feel like, there's been plenty of defenses where I thought I had the right matchup, and they just stunk.
It's funny that you say that, because that was another reason why, if you look at our fab, there's a lot of weeks where we're like, this defense aligned with what they're playing against is going to do really well, and then they don't. And the team that we cut usually ends up being the defense that explodes and has a huge day. That's the
worst. I hate
it. It's why I don't subscribe to streaming often, but in situations like this where you're chipping away with it and you're not spending much, it doesn't feel too bad until you lose that game by a point or two, and then you're like, that was stupid.
Yep. No, I'm with you. I'm totally with you on that. To give you a breather here on 2022 talk, we move forward and just ask you a question about 2023. Denver is going to have a new head coach. Now, we don't know who it will be. We don't know if it's going to be an offensive genius or some defensive stalwart. We have no idea. But knowing what we saw in Broncos country this year, right, in drafts, there's a lot of people, a lot of high stakes players that were loading up on the Broncos. Javonte Williams, Cortland Sutton. There you go. Exactly. Me too. I'll raise my hand. My name is Eric Balkman. I've invested way too many Denver Broncos. Hi, Eric. This year, knowing that this happened this year, where we got and so many people in the high stakes industry got the one team so wrong. Are you going to fade Broncos in drafts again next year, despite not knowing who's going to be the coach? Because we got it so wrong this year, what's to say that all of a sudden they're going to be bounce back candidates next year?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question, because again, this is where I feel like almost embarrassed that we took Russ Wilson in the 9th round, and I look at every quarterback for this team, where every quarterback drafted after that would have been a much better option for us, and we felt like we got a bargain. And we have a lot of shares of Cortland Sutton across the board. So, and honestly, he's still a talent that I would be interested in investing in. He'll probably be, if the OC and the head coach aren't completely Jeff Saturday type shots in the dark by management there in Denver, then I think that there's still viability to all of their players. I'm intrigued by Dulcich, especially in a tight end pool that really has shown that Kelce is the god and everyone else is just trying. I'd be interested in Dulcich, and it shouldn't cost that much. Their defense is still, I think, probably better than average. You can't not walk away from McManus and Mile High. I'm not going to say that I'm going to go after Russ at all, but I do have a recency bias of failure that I don't think I'll be pursuing any shares of Russ next year. But Cortland Sutton, Judy, Dulcich, some of the other ones, I'll be okay with it depending on the draft capital. But I'm not eager until I hear about who the OC and the head coach are going to be.
And that's the thing, is you got to get somebody who can maximize Russell Wilson's skill set, and that was something Nathaniel Hackett just wasn't able to unlock in Denver. Teddy, okay, so I bring this up, Norm, because this time of year everybody's making sure they kick over every rock, they examine everything, maybe a little bit of paralysis by analysis, maybe a little bit of think long, think wrong, but I know everybody's going to explore it. Tua Tagovailoa had a concussion, or is experiencing concussion symptoms after the Christmas Day game against the Green Bay Packers. If Teddy Bridgewater is announced as the starter against New England, are you still starting Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, or can you make a case for, I don't want to play those guys with Bridgewater this week?
Unless it was going to be a really bad weather situation, I wouldn't pause. Both of those wide receivers did well with Teddy against Minnesota a couple weeks back, and Teddy's a vet and he knows the game. I mean, obviously Belichick's going to try and disguise things and probably put it out there to try and blanket people, but I will not have any problem starting Tyreek Hill, not only because we drafted him high, but because he's going to be okay unless he's injured and nobody's really talked about it. Waddle obviously showed last week that he can definitely still perform in any situation, and they were really pressuring them. I thought, obviously, Tua is still trying to remember his name, but I wouldn't have any problem with it for either of those guys this week with Teddy.
And I happen to agree with you too. And the flip side of this is like, okay, well, if you don't trust Bridgewater for Hill and Waddle, what receiver is on your bench that you're going to trust, right?
Right.
What receiver are you, or running back or tight end or whatever? Who are you putting in and benching Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle for?
You have to have a really deep. You have to probably be a zero running backer who drafted a
Totally.
really deep core of wides to be able to cover you in that scenario where you're saying I'm going to sit Tyreek Hill, who's probably drafted first or second and has been a star all year, unless he's hurt. Again, that's the
Yeah.
contender. Is what's the weather going to be like, and is Tyreek Hill banged up?
When you look back at this year, now I know the Broncos you and I missed on in a lot of drafts. What are some of the players? And I say you got right either in two ways. You got this player evaluation right, and that he was awesome and you had him on a lot of teams, or conversely, a player that you didn't like at all, avoided him everywhere, and he stunk up the joint. Are there any players that fall into either one of those categories for you and Jason this year?
Yeah, we actually hit on a couple. Barkley was one of them that we were really high on early, and I remember a couple drafts where we were getting actually guff from people when we took him in the late first round. And Ramondre's another one that, even though he's a later round, and I know that a lot of the zero running backers tried to get him later, but we were focusing on him, and we lost him a lot to some of those zero running backs. We were like, I'm going to get this guy. Josh Jacobs is another one we were kind of high on, and we have a lot of shares of, and he's done well. Although who knows what's going to happen now because he's made his discontentness public. Tyler Lockett was another one we felt like was heavily undervalued, and we did well with that. The things that we avoided, that we didn't want anything to do with New Orleans. I wanted nothing to do with Michael Thomas. We wanted nothing to do with Alvin Kamara, and we were able to at least hit that. But there was a lot that we did get wrong too. We didn't expect to see the production that was out there for I'm trying to think of, Geno Smith. We were off on that a little bit. It's hard to remember the bad beats, or it's hard. What is it? It's hard to remember the good beats and always remember the bad beats.
Exactly.
Obviously Cortland Sutton and Russ Wilson they hurt. Those hurt to me because we did think that Russ was going to cook. I fell shy of buying an actual shirt saying "Let Russ cook," but man, I really feel
you're like
embarrassed
the next level down from that as far as
just there.
Yeah.
Right.
Let me ask you about New Orleans. Why were you not interested in New Orleans this year? What turned you off about that team?
And this is probably going back to your question about Denver next year, is that we had a lot of Michael Thomas. I mean, we both had confidence in him. He really was the do-all end-all a couple of years ago, and then all the injuries, all the drama really kind of soured him in our minds. And the signs were all there from the get-go that he wasn't going to be a full season. He wasn't going to be a full health. Kamara, we were more concerned about the legal stuff that obviously kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed. But we wanted to avoid that. So both of those situations that did end up coming out the way we thought they would, I don't want them to. We still have shares of Kamara. I think we have zero though of Thomas. We were definitely sour on him, and it's because of the negative recency bias that we had from years past, which I will have with Russ Wilson going forward.
Kamara's gonna be interesting next year. I was just reading about this today that he's playing on third down snaps, I think like 20% less this season than he has in previous years, which is obviously hurting his receiving totals. And the legal stuff we should know what the suspension is for him next year. And I saw the video too, that like it wasn't as egregious as the Ray Rice one was, but yeah, I mean, you still see what was going down with Alvin Kamara. It didn't look good.
Really makes you wonder what kind of effect is it Taysom Hill that's causing him to lose less of those third downs, or is it because there's nobody else there? At least when they had Ingram.
Well, and the other thing too is
healthy.
like they've almost been using Kamara like they were using Ingram as like this like inside runner type guy, and like to me that's not utilizing him to his
advantage, his strength,
his skill set. Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. That's one guy. I probably will not have a whole lot of him. I was actually kicking this around in my head once the season ends, what I could get for him in my dynasty leagues. Like what's the best return I can get back, because I probably should have sold on him before the start of the 2022 season. And now it's like, I don't know if I can get enough back for him, but maybe 2023 will be even worse. Kamara's probably not a guy I'm be in on next year for sure.
How much dynasty share do you have him in? One or two?
It's probably only like 2 or 3 leagues, I would say. I only play in like 7 or 8 dynasty leagues. So it's like percentage wise, it's like almost half of them. Right. But I think that, I have had a good history of being the bag holder at tight end and receiver. I always bring up Hines Ward. Like I got Hines Ward for a song in several of my leagues. And then the dude, when everybody said he was cooked, he had like 3 or 4 more all pro or Pro Bowl years. Right. And tight end, I've had some pretty good success with, tight ends that everybody said, oh, they're like Tony Gonzalez, like, oh, they're done. Get rid of them. And then I was like, I don't know about that. And then I keep them. I have also had some success trading running backs away. Like Todd Gurley, I got rid of. That was probably like my best trade ever. When I got rid of Todd Gurley, and then he had the knee issue, and I cashed in like a Tevin Coleman, and then like 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick or something like that.
Nice.
So I was loving life for that one. But that's why I look at this Kamara one. Like I feel like I probably waited a year too long, but I still think that there might be something there. Somebody might want to be willing to give something.
He's still relatively young. It's as if he's not playing in the penal league, with
Right.
the longest yard, it should be fine for him to come back if they can get an offense around him and use him the way, like you said, he's supposed to be being used or should be being used.
He will turn 28 during training camp next year, which you say, oh, that's kind of old. Well, remember,
Yeah.
he hasn't really been he's not your traditional 28-year-old running back. Like he has not absorbed the hits of a lot of 28-year-old running backs have, because he was utilized in space. So maybe there is somebody out there that says like, you know what, I could see this guy being pretty good into age 30, and I'll get 2 years out of him. They'll give me something. I don't know. It's something I haven't explored yet, but I will. You have been in the championship round before. I'm just kind of curious as to your thoughts on this. Maybe you have some, maybe you don't. What's something that maybe players who are watching this, Norm, that have never been in the championship round before here in championship week, what's the best advice you can give them on playing it the correct way? What's a mistake that they should avoid making?
It's, and everyone's got their own way to analyze things. The biggest thing I think that would be a problem that people overthink. They overthink what they've got in their roster. I say that after just saying that we absolutely killed the text line on talking about the Zay Jones sit in the last week's weather with Sauce Gardner, but you have to really think about certain things, but don't overthink it. There's certain things you have to rely on. You have to rely on what got you there to this point. And that's kind of what we've been focusing on in back and forth since last night is, okay, what got us here? We just need to set the best roster. Don't overthink it. And then if nothing else, try and enjoy it. Because that's, again, where I keep reminding myself, look, if we weren't second, whatever, if we were 832nd, it wouldn't be any different. We got here from winning a championship in the league and got what we got. And we're having this great opportunity to compete at this next level for a huge prize. Don't make it about the, oh, I wish I had played that. Don't make it about the, oh, I wish I had this player or I had Fab available to me. Just remember that it's fun. This is a game. Enjoy it.
Truer words have never been spoken. I totally agree with you on that. Enjoy the moment, live in the moment. You never know when this is going to happen again. Don't look at the bad side of it. Look at the good side of it, and be happy that it's happening and enjoy it while it's there. I don't want to. And final question here for you, Norm. I don't want to make this seem like, there's a player that a lot of FFPC people are going to start this week, and he's going to stink, so you should probably bench him. It's tough to say to people with everything on the line to bench your studs or anything like that. But when you look at week 17 fantasy football, is there a player out there that you think is going to be started in a lot of leagues that probably should not be started in a lot of leagues because you think he's in for a disappointing week 17? And then conversely, a sleeper that you think is most FFPC players won't start him, but you think that they should start him in their lineups?
Again, having all the conversation that we had, the person I think that would be a possible sit that wouldn't be, and again, this is only looking at Monday night's example. Michael Pittman's not going to be something going against the Giants that I would feel comfortable starting if I had an other alternative with a better matchup. And that's on a lot of, I have him in a lot of teams, and that whole offense is Denver light, and I don't know what to do in a situation where you've drafted Michael Pittman and you want to rely on him as a wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 2. That offense looks horrible, and they can't protect anybody. Who knows? They're going to march out for the pretzel vendor of the week for the QB there after Foles' failure. So yeah. It's going to be really a struggle, I think, for Pittman to produce at the level that you'd want him to produce. You'd have to have something to be able to put in play there, but like we talked about, there's no Fab, and you have to have a deep bench to be able to put him out. But that would probably be a sleeper sit, if you could call it that, but it seems kind of silly. I would go out of my way to try and avoid anyone from Indianapolis or Denver this week, just because those teams are in such disarray. But again, you have to play who you've got, and if you don't have anybody different other than Pittman or other than Sutton, who I think I actually left Sutton and some teams still on the bench because I didn't really think he was going to start, and then I didn't have the ability to swap him in even at a flex because they didn't say he was going to start until later.
Right.
So, and I would have loved to have gotten him in there because I've been holding on to him forever in the hopes that he would come back and do something. But so for a sleeper start, I think this is probably a reach, and I don't have a lot of shares, and we don't have him on this team. I wish we did. It was Drake London. I think he's going to have a huge week. I think this is the next step in Atlanta's evolution, and they've got nothing to play for. So why wouldn't they throw the entire book out there for Ritter and Drake London to just practice what they're going to do next year, which is hopefully a lot more. He was a highly coveted player for me, along with Olave, that I wanted shares of both of them early. And I think he's going to have a good week here in the last week if people have him. I did see on a lot of, when going back through, because I've got some VP teams that still have waivers available where he's been waived and you can't pick him up because he's on the drop and block.
The drop list, yeah.
Right. So people might not have him still because they got frustrated. But if you look at the last 3 weeks, he's got over 7 targets, I think, each week and a bunch of catches and touchdowns. So he should have a good run of things against Arizona at home.
Yeah. And it's crazy. I think like this time next year, maybe in 2 years, Norm, we'll be looking back on this 2022 rookie receiver class. I mean, you mentioned London and Olave already, but you think about, I mean, Garrett Wilson has been unbelievable. Wilson and Olave were on the same Ohio State team last year. Jamison Williams, who has been coming on. Treylon Burks.
Dotson.
And Dotson, who has been coming on lately too. And this is all, by the way, like, Pickens and Pierce has had his moments, and we'll see what happens with those guys. But Christian Watson, Romeo Dobbs, and then who is the other guy? Oh, for Houston, John Mechie III it was like leukemia or some kind of cancer or something.
Right.
He didn't play at all this year. Tyquan Thornton showed flashes too. So I don't know. This could be a really, really talented receiver.
It's going to depend, though, on whether these offensive coordinators can utilize them the right way, and if we can get quarterbacks that actually are better than Zach Wilson and some of the other dumpster fires that are. Even the veterans are starting to look a little rusty on some of this, and you can have great receivers, but if you don't have a coordinator who's going to utilize them and a quarterback that can get it there, I don't know. But you're right. This is a deep class of wide receivers, and that was the frustrating thing about the draft is you always want to get rookie talents, but you can't get them all because other people are just as excited about them, and then it's a roll of the dice.
And I will say too, like with there's gonna be a certain amount of teams that are looking for head coaches, new head coaches, and obviously new quarterbacks to pair with those new head coaches. The quarterback crop for 2023 looks really good with obviously Bryce Young, CJ Stroud. You have Will Levis, Anthony Richardson, Tanner McKee out of Stanford as well. So there's some. I mean, we could see like 4 quarterbacks going in like the top 15, top 10 picks. That's entirely possible. And if that happens, to pair them up with these good young receivers is certainly going to make fantasy football a lot more fun in 2023. Fantasy football for week 17 for you. I don't know how fun it's going to be for you, Norm. What are your plans for this weekend? How are you watching the games?
Again, trying to stay to the same course we've always kept on through these last 5 weeks of playoff championship in the league, and then obviously these last 3 weeks. But it's just going to be trying to put the best roster out there, crossing our fingers and hoping that the Go Bills guys are not as in tune with the hopefully the almanac only goes 2021 and 2022 and they don't have the first week of 2023 in it.
It stops after week 16 of 2022.
And again, I think they've got it wrapped up because they've got the Mahomes, Kelce, McKinnon combo that's going to put them well out of everyone else's reach. But everyone around me, again, I feel like I'm in a bunch of I feel like I'm in Buffalo Airport because there's just a bunch of Buffalo players on the teams that are around me, and we have nobody going Monday night, so it's going to be horrible watching the butter melt on a season going into Monday night, and hopefully we have everything right, because otherwise we're just going to be one of those teams, like I said, that dropped out of the top 20 like last year. I don't want to be, but that's probably what's. I'm not going to say it's probably in the cards, but I'm hoping it's not.
Well, listen, regardless, congratulations on a fantastic season.
Thanks.
getting
Thanks.
all the way up to second place with just 1 week to go is an incredible accomplishment. I'm pulling for you. I hope you can squeeze it out, pull off the upset, down with Biff Tannen, and make sure that that you can pull this out. It'd be tremendous to see you guys win the million, or at least, a six-figure grand prize if you can't pull that.
I mean,
off.
heck, we did it in the regular season. We started out 0-4, and we ended up being the second seed with most total points. So.
Yeah. Now, was this team? I could be wrong on this. Was this team 6-6 on the season?
Yeah.
6-6, second overall.
We usually only run with 2 main events, and our main event, our normal main event, was actually a higher record, but less points, and we didn't get a seeding. But this one was 6-6, and we obviously had a very tough league to compete against, because again, we were second seed and we were only 8 points out of being the most total points. So we didn't stop the guy from getting the sweep, but again, we got the seed and we got the buy-in and we got the championship. So that's cake. Now this is all icing, and I just hope we can keep it up.
Yeah, well, hopefully you enjoy the cake and the icing
in
week 16. You follow him on Twitter at Amity Hooks. He is Norton Behrens. Norton, thank you so much for joining me this week. Really appreciate it. Best of luck to you, not only in week 16, but the playoff challenge and next year as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Balky. Happy New Year.
You got it. Happy New Year to you too, Norm. That is Norm Behrens, the co-owner of the second place team in the FFPC main event, heading into the final week of the season here on the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown. I want to thank him, want to thank the FFPC and everybody who made this show possible. I want to remind everybody to play the FFPC Weekly Challenge. Make sure you're doing that over at myffpc.com. It is a game that does not require a draft, game that does not require a salary cap. You choose 10 players or 12 players if you want to play in the slim format or the classic format with kickers and defenses, and you watch them ride throughout the weekend's games. It's set it and forget it. One player per NFL team, $35 to enter or $200 to enter. You can play in a 100-team format, a 30-team format, or a 10-team format. If you play in the 10-team format, if you beat out everybody else in your league, 9 other people, you will win a free entry in the 2023 FFPC main event to compete for $1 million. I want to remind everybody that the playoff challenges for the FFPC are open right now. The world famous FFPC playoff challenge, $200 to enter a $500,000 grand prize. And then, of course, the Footballguys playoff challenge, $35 to enter a $100,000 grand prize in there. Start 2023 off with a big bang with a six-figure grand prize. That's all at myffpc.com. Next week, we will be back live with the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown. I have our guest, and he is going to be Matt Berman, who is also crushing the FFPC main event right now. Matt Berman, you saw him before on the HSFF Hour. He will be the guest at 10/9 Central next Tuesday here. Tune into the Better Sports Network app, which you can get free in the Google Play Store or the App Store for Apple. That's free. You can watch me on that at 10 o'clock until midnight Eastern tomorrow. Curtis Patrick and myself chopping it up on championship week for you from 10 to midnight. That's on the Better Sports Network app, also on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And then, of course, Friday night, myself and Farrell Elliott kicking it live at 10/9 Central right back here on this FFPC YouTube channel with another great episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, episode number 601. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Really appreciate it. Good luck in all of your championship week matchups. Hopefully the ball bounces your way. Thanks for watching. Thank you for listening to the High Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. And thanks to Grapes for our theme music. Please review the podcast on iTunes under the RotoViz radio feed. It helps us find new listeners. Contact us via email, rotovizradio@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you think, and follow us on Twitter at RotoVizRadio. And remember, you can always support the show by subscribing to RotoViz at a 10% discount through the NFL podcast homepage, rotoviz.com/podcast.